We use them as writers, we use them as educators, we use them in so many facets of our life and for so many reasons. But we also seek out stories as individuals as a way to make us feel like our experience isn't unusual or that we're not alone.
Hello and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, I interview peak performing innovators in the creative, social impact, and earth conservation spaces who are working to change the world. This episode is brought to you by Brain FM. Brain FM combines the best of music and neuroscience to help you relax, focus, meditate, and even sleep. I love it and have been using it to write, create, and do some of my deepest work. Because you're a listener of the show, you can get a free trial. Head over to brain.fm/innovative mindset to check it out. If you decide to subscribe, you can get 20% off with the coupon code Innovative Mindset, all one word. And now, let's get to the show. Hey there, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg. I'm your host, and I am super happy that you're here. I'm also thrilled, happy, and honored to have this week's guest on the show. Check this out. Dr. Karen M Bryson is an award-winning /option screenwriter and USA Today bestselling author of over 50 books. She hosts 2 podcasts, The Curious Professor, which I love, and the Dead Writers Society, which I did not know about before I started doing my research, so I'm super excited about that too. Karen and her husband are the owners and founders of Short on Time Books, a small boutique publishing company, and Short on Time Academy, where they help coaches, creatives, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs to create buzz for their brands through book authorship and the power of podcasting. When she's not writing or podcasting, Karen works as a tenured university professor and searches for fascinating stories in unusual places. You know, that's catnip to me. Karen, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. It's such an honor to be here.
Oh, you're fabulous. Thank you. We're a mutual admiration society. And I'm going to start right in with Midlife on Fire. The reason is because that's one of our commonalities, aside from we're both curious people. Can you talk a little bit about what Midlife on Fire is and what prompted you, what inspired you to do this incredible project, this incredible anthology of women writers who are in that certain place in their lives?
Well, it started when I went to the grocery store and I noticed that people went from calling me Miss to calling me ma'am. And I thought, this is strange. When did this happen that I went from being a Miss to a ma'am? And it just slowly started to occur to me that as I was getting older and moving from what you would call the young adult, maybe to middle adult to middle age, when you're in your 40s and then 50s and then into your 60s, you're in that transition period where you're not young anymore, but you're not really old, you're not elderly. And it's a time of life where I think for most of us, we still consider ourselves full of life and full of adventures and a lot of things we still want to do and accomplish. It's not like we're ready for retirement necessarily, but yet the younger generations look at us and kind of put us into that category of being old and over the hill. So it's kind of a weird time in life. And I was also noticing that I wasn't seeing a lot of representation of particularly women like me, women in midlife in the media. There weren't a lot of books that were focusing on this stage in life. There definitely aren't a lot of people on TV, or in movies where that are what I would call accurate representations of women in midlife. We still see some what I would call A-list actresses who are in our generation, but in a way they're being forced to do everything they can to maintain a youthful appearance. It's almost as if we don't want to accept the fact that a woman who was an A-list actress in her 20s and 30s is now 50. We don't want to accept the fact that she's growing old. So and almost to the point of some of these women doing extraordinary things to try to maintain that appearance of youthfulness.
Mm.
And it's like, but you're a middle-aged woman. It's okay to be middle-aged. Why are we trying to hide the fact, particularly for women, that we're growing older, that we're getting older? Why is it so difficult in our society to accept this time of life as a natural part of the process of life, um, and for us to have a voice and be seen and be heard within the mainstream culture? So there were all of these things that were really starting to affect me. You know, why don't we see more middle-aged women in movies and television shows? You know, there's more than just the ingenue and the golden girl. What happened to all the women in their 40s, 50s, 60s? You know, we don't disappear. We don't get floated off onto an iceberg and go away for the rest of our lives. So it was really important to me to do some kind of project, although I wasn't sure what it was going to be or what form it was going to take. But for me, it was so important that I thought, I need to do this. I don't know what's going to happen with it. I don't know, you know, if people will, you know, appreciate it or, but I really feel for me, it's something that I need to say and talk about, and an issue that I really want to bring out into society. Let's have discussions about this. And let's really empower women in our age group to have a voice and to have confidence and to be seen and to be heard. And it's okay for us to look the way that we look. You know, we don't have to go to extraordinary measures and poison ourselves and, you know, do all those things that a lot of women do to try to maintain that last vestige of youth. It's okay that you're getting older. It's okay to accept that aging process. It's completely natural and normal. And it can be even great. You know, this is such an exciting time of life for many women. I mean, we can talk about the whole menopause thing, but, you know, there's a certain freedom that comes with no longer having that role of, you know, motherhood. And, you know, a lot of women in our age range, I don't have children, but women who have had children, you know, now the childbearing years are done. You don't have that pressure anymore. Your kids may have grown and left the nest. You know, now's your time. What's going to come out of those next chapters in your life now that you have a certain freedom where you don't necessarily have to have uh, those traditional roles or be, you know, be I use the word slave to those traditional roles, but feel like you have to live up to those traditional roles. You know, we don't have to do that anymore. There was a time and a place where many of us were raised in more traditional households, but you know, those times have changed and we have a lot more freedom to do a lot more things. You know, what are we going to do with the time that we hopefully have left in our lives?
Wow.
I know there's a lot to unpack there. I'm passionate about this topic.
Yeah, and so am I. I'm so passionate. I started a podcast called Two Women of a Certain Age with a friend of mine because we're so passionate about this topic. And everything, yeah, you know, I was just nodding the entire time you were talking. I'm just mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's so much to what you just said that I don't even know where to begin, but I want to begin with this notion of freedom. Right. One of the things, one of the themes that you touched on is that women in their 40s and 50s often have more freedom, and yet we don't necessarily feel like we do. Like we will take on other responsibilities. Some women who are mother, I also don't have children. I have cats and a husband who's a clown, so I'm kind of child with or with child.
And he's literally a clown.
He's literally a clown. Yes, exactly. So what how do you address the huge hot air balloon in the room, which is all about this notion of stepping into that freedom and stepping into that power? And with Midlife on Fire, you you gave a voice, right? You offered a chance for women to have a voice, to express, especially in some of the themes, to express their freedom in this age.
Yeah, it's such a time of transition and of blossoming into a person that you might not have even felt that you were for a very long time. If I can talk about my own story, uh, I lost a connection to my creative self. I was an extremely creative young adult. I always did creative writing and I always did a lot of theater and acting and just really involved in a lot of things that were very creative for a really long time when I was a teenager and a young adult. And then when I transitioned, as many of us do, into being a full-time career person, and then going and pursuing a doctorate and doing all of those things that I felt were necessary to be a success in a work world. I kind of lost that connection with my creative self. And then I felt when I entered into premenopause and was in my 40s, there was something missing and I wasn't sure what it was. And I realized that I wasn't being creative in any way that was artistic. And that's really where my creativity comes from, is more in the arts. And I had lost that huge part of myself. I mean, I was
Mhm.
so passionate about the arts when I was a young person, and I just lost that connection. And it took me a while to really get it back and to reestablish it. So I'm hoping that other women can, because a lot of the themes in this anthology are a reconnection to maybe a part of yourself that you lost when you became a career person or when you became a mother, and again doing all of those things that society tells you you're supposed to do when you're in your late 20s and 30s, to be a parent and to be a success in the work world. And and you don't really have a lot of time because or focus because you're thinking about, how am I going to get that house and that car and all those other those materialistic things. But then, you get to an age, or at least I did, where maybe you have everything and then you think, well, do I really need anything else?
Hmm.
No, that's the time to look inward. And for me, it was like, I really want to reestablish this connection to my creative self, which started oddly enough with just picking up some instruments and starting to play music, which I did a little bit when I was young, but I was really more into writing and theater. But I just started playing music and playing instruments. And that really was the start of a reawakening of my creativity and getting back really seriously into, I was doing some playwriting after I left acting, theater acting. And I was doing some playwriting, but really getting into screenwriting and writing novels and doing more of that intense work. Really, really came to fruition when I was in my 40s.
I love that. It's interesting. You went to music to reconnect, and I was always a musician and an actor, and I went to writing to reconnect. So it's
That's
really
funny.
it's really interesting how, but we all, I think we all come to that point, come to your creative muse moment, if you will, where you
Yeah.
have to remember, when I worked with my clients, when I work with my clients, I still have them. I talk to them about what is it that they love to do when they were children creatively. Did you bang on pots? Did you make up stories? Did you dance around the living room? What did you do? And how can you adapt it to who you are today? So, what is your guidance? What is your thought about people who want to reconnect, women especially, since we're talking about women specifically right now, about women who want to reconnect with that creative muse? What would you say they need to do to begin?
And it's interesting that this really ties back to what my most recent passion has been, and that's curiosity. I have a curiosity podcast,
Which I love.
and yeah, thank you. And I'm really an advocate of following your curiosity. And I think if we allow ourselves to do that, what are the things that you're curious about? What do you want to learn more about? What are you finding interesting right now at this point of your life?
Mhm.
And follow that curiosity and ask the question, what if? I love the power of what if. What if I were to go on a trip to Hawaii because I've always dreamed of going to Hawaii? Follow your curiosity. If you can afford it and it's safe to do so, go on a trip to Hawaii and see where that leads you. What are the things that you find when you're there? You know, uh, do you like the culture enough to want to learn more about it? Do you like the plants and wildlife there that you want to study more about that? Do you want to learn more about the waterfalls that are there because there's thousands of them? Maybe you want to learn how to do a traditional Hawaiian dance or learn about Hawaiian music. Follow your curiosity there, and that will continue to lead you down the path of what is the natural next step for you to take that will empower you to be a more creative person.
Yay, you talked about curiosity. Yay. And I love your podcast. The Curious Professor is on my playlist every week. And I would love it if you would talk a little bit about, first of all, again, what prompted you to start it, because beginnings to me are fascinating. That instant of, I know what let's do is it's currently what's holding all of my attention, because something happens in us when we have the idea and then decide to pursue the idea. And you went, oh, I'm going to start this. And you called it the Curious Professor, of course, because you are a professor. But what prompted that? And how do you choose your guests? What are the things that you're curious about in exploring in your show?
This is going to lead us down a little bit of a mystical, synchronous pathway. So I
Awesome.
hope you and your guests don't mind that.
I
There's a
never
little
mind
bit
mystical and synchronous ever. So
this
go for it.
there there's a little bit of magic here. So I knew I wanted to do a podcast because I've always loved podcasts, and I felt like that was a way that was going to challenge me. Something that your guests should know about me, that they might not know or might not realize if they've ever listened to my podcast, is that I'm extremely, extremely, extremely introverted, and I've always been. It takes a lot for me to get out of my comforts, which is kind of odd because I'm a professor and I have always loved acting. But those are really playing roles more so than
Mhm.
just being yourself in public, which takes a different kind of courage. But I've always been extremely introverted. It's very difficult for me to speak as myself in public, or it has been. I've really embraced doing this type of work, but it took a lot for me to get the courage to be able to do a podcast, like to take on that role of interviewing people I didn't know and doing it in a public way. Um, I have always been that type of person that over prepared for hours before any type of public speaking. And I did that for a long time as a professor too, before I gained a lot of I need a tremendous amount of confidence in myself and what I'm going to talk about before I feel a level of comfort that I don't have to over prepare. But for example, the first time I was a podcast guest, I worked for about 40 hours trying to figure out exactly what I was going to say, every question that the woman could possibly ask me, and how I was going to answer. She didn't ask me one thing that I thought she was going to ask me, and it was perfectly fine. So that was a huge learning lesson for me, that I really do have inside me, I think, the answers to what people are going to ask. And even if I don't, that's okay. I can always say, I'm not sure, but let me think about that. Uh, but so my level of comfort and really stretching myself and getting out of my comfort zone was the next step for me, was to do a podcast. So um, it was really hard for me to get the courage to do it, but I thought, if I do it in the context of being a professor, and I've always been a naturally curious person, that seems like a good way for me to position myself for the greatest amount of comfort to do something that is tremendously difficult and very uncomfortable for me to do. So I was trying to at least set myself a little bit up for success by having that type of a show. And I actually didn't know at first that it was going to be an interview show at all. I thought that I was going to just talk about topics that I found interesting, and I would do research and then maybe talk for 5 or 10 minutes. It was going to be a very short show, like weekly show. You know, give a little bit of facts about some topic that I found interesting. That was my original thought when I thought of The Curious Professor and I was going to have a show. So that was what I was planning when I first said, okay, I'm going to have a podcast. It's going to be The Curious Professor. It's going to be what things I find interesting. And I just put out there that I was going to have a show, and I recorded a trailer and I put it out there. And then people just started coming to me and saying they wanted to be on my show. And I was like, that's interesting. I don't really have an interview show, but let me try it. So the first person came to me and said, I want to be a guest on your show. I said, okay, great. Let's figure out how I can, what do I find interesting about you and what you're doing, and how can I create a show around that? So it ended up being a little bit different than what I thought, but it was actually really a blessing in disguise because it it saved me from having to think of a lot of topics myself. People just brought me topics, and then I created a show around whatever their thing was, which was equally as interesting and actually in some ways more fascinating, because then I could put my brain to work and think, well, what is interesting about this person, and how could I create a show around what I find most interesting about this person, which actually ended up being, to me, maybe even more interesting than me just thinking up topics that I thought were interesting. And it seems to be working because I do have a lot of listeners who enjoy my show, and I have no shortage of guests. Like, I have not well, I can't say not ask anyone. There's a few people that I've asked to be on my show, but really the majority, like 90% of the people who have been on my show have asked me to be on the show. There are people who just say, oh, I really love your show. I really want to be a guest. And they end up being just incredibly fascinating people. And it's very rare that someone comes to me and says, I want to be on your show, because who wants to be on a curiosity podcast that isn't interesting? Like, that would be odd. So most of the people who ask me to be on my show are incredibly interesting, and I could probably do several shows on different aspects of their lives and their work. But I always find something very fascinating about everyone who's asked me to be on the show. So people have come to me, and it's really been that kind of a magical, synchronous thing that, and it's strange too, because every time I say, oh, I would like to have a guest on, like, I think of a topic, I would like to have a guest on, for example, I said, oh, I haven't had any musicians. I really like to have a musician. And like a week later, an Emmy Award winning musician emailed me and said, oh, I'd like to be a guest on your show. That's the level of stuff, the magic that happens of my podcast. You're muted.
And I thought I was muted. That's funny. I, you're like, oh, it's blank. What's going on? So, what I was saying was, you put that energy out into the universe, basically going, I want to see pink zebras, and all of a sudden you're going to start seeing pink zebras, right? So it makes a lot of sense to me when your motivations are as pure and as clear as yours are to do this show, that you would start getting the kinds of guests that you want to get. And yet there's a lot of nuts and bolts about doing the show. And that makes me wonder, I guess the best way to ask this is, if you're doing this show and you're interviewing people, everybody has their own story to tell, right? We're the hero of our own stories. You then, through preparation, create the podcast. What is your vision for the show?
First and foremost, for me, it's about a listener first and foremost. So, because it's a curiosity podcast, and my overall goal for the show is to inspire other people's curiosity about different topics. Um, so, I want to find something about somebody's story or somebody's life that's going to be most interesting that I feel will be most interesting and make the most interesting show for a listener. So a person might come to me, and say they're a filmmaker and they've made, a number of films, but there may be one or two that I find particularly interesting that I think other people would find interesting. Like there was a documentary filmmaker, and we talked about a number of his documentaries. But the thing that I found the most fascinating, and I had already seen this documentary way before he wanted to be on my show, but he did one and it was Bigfoot versus aliens. And I thought, Bigfoot versus aliens. And it wasn't like, a horror movie or anything. This is a real documentary. I
Hmm.
thought that's interesting. What I think people would find that fascinating, and it is one of the episodes that has gotten the most listeners to download it. But what the documentary is about is it's about people who are in those communities, like the people. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Bigfoot and the alien communities, but there are people who are really like very into hunting for Bigfoot and hunting for aliens. So it's really about those communities and those people who are really part of that passionate community of Bigfoot hunters and alien hunters, and and talking to those people within those communities about what motivates them, and what is interesting about that passion or that obsession. So that's really what the documentaries are about. But it sure makes a great headline, like Bigfoot versus aliens. Yeah, I want to know. I want to know more about that. Just the headline alone is like, yeah, that sparks people's curiosity. Really, is an alien and Bigfoot fighting? I mean, what is that about?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's really about finding what is going to be the most interesting thing about that person. Really, I mean, as a podcaster, you're going to have to find an interesting headline, but also, really, what's going to spark somebody's curiosity? What's going to pique their interest? And they're going to go, "Oh, wow, that's interesting." And of course, to do service to the guest, I want to learn more about that. I want to learn more about that person. I want to read their book. I want to watch their documentary, because obviously a person comes on a show with the goal of them inspiring people to learn more about them and the service or the product that they have, right? So, yes, they're on the show to be of value to a listener, but they also for you to learn more about them. So, what's going to be the thing that's going to be most interesting to a listener to want them to take action to then go watch the documentary or go listen to a person's music or go buy their book?
Yes. I'm just gonna keep yes. Yes, Karen. Everything you're saying, yes. I it's so interesting to me, that notion again of curiosity and wanting to bring out the most curiosity piquing bits, I guess, like Bigfoot versus alien or ghost hunters today, something
Right.
like that, right? It's going to make you go, huh? What? Wait, I want to know more about this. And yet it ultimately comes down to story, right? We're all, I like to say, the when you were 5 and you made an excuse to your mom about why you ate all the cookies, you were telling stories, right? So we're all born storytellers, and yet some of us embrace it on a more formal level. And I'd love to talk to you about why that's important. What role do stories play in our lives, and how do we use them to both improve our lives and even live our lives?
Well, stories uh, really have so many roles in our society and in our culture. We use them for educational purposes. So, like for example, we tell a story about when we're a child. If we can use your example, we tell a story about a kid who wasn't paying attention and touched a hot stove and, burnt his fingers. We tell that to a kid so they don't touch a hot stove and burn their fingers. So we use stories for education and instruction. We use stories to help inspire and motivate people. We use stories for all kinds of purposes. We use them as writers. We use them as educators. We use them in so many facets of our life and for so many reasons. But we also um, seek out stories as individuals as a way to make us feel like our experience isn't unusual or that we're not alone. Like when we go through a traumatic event or incident, or maybe if we're depressed, we seek out stories of other people who have experienced that so that we know it kind of normalizes our experience and we feel like, okay, other people have done this or experienced this, so I know I'm not alone. And they turned out okay in the end. So I know I can survive this. There's so many ways in which stories can be so helpful in our lives. And also, they're just fun and entertaining too. I mean, we use them to because we want to have an emotional experience. Fictional movies and TV shows and fictional books. We use them for all of those reasons too. They can do all of those things, but they also entertain us. They inspire us and they're educational, but they also entertain us. They're fun. We liked having that emotional experience, particularly movies like horror movies. We don't necessarily want to be trapped on an island with a sociopath who's killing everyone on the island, but it's sure fun and sometimes to watch other people going through that experience. It's an exhilaration, a thrill, right? Um, we may be like the position I am in, where, you're a married person, you've been married for years. I love being married, but maybe I don't want to have an affair, obviously, but I want to feel what it feels like to fall in love again. So I watch a romantic comedy. It gives that experience, that emotional experience of a person falling in love. And it's nice to feel that because, yes, I remember what that was like when I was a much younger person, but that's why people read romance novels or that's why they watch romantic comedies because they like to feel that feeling of what it feels like again to be a person falling in love.
Hmm. You touched on something that has been a pet subject of mine that I've been noodling around for a long time. And you said feeling like you're falling in love. We read romance novels to get to get access to that feeling, to get access to that perhaps passion or the sort of the novelty, if you will, of the
Yeah.
newness of the relationship. But yet those stories are pretty formulaic, right? We're going to have a protagonist and another protagonist, and they're going to dislike each other at the beginning, but yet they're going to have this passionate connection and they're not going to know what to do with it. And at some point in through the drama of the story, they will after overcoming many obstacles and conflicts, admit that they have feelings for each other and they kiss at the end. That's a typical Harlequin romance. So, so there's something that we love about these kinds of archetypical stories, I guess,
Yeah.
that you can look at romance novels or you can look at the hero's journey. And yet, like you said, we're not all going to go to the island with the sociopath, but romance, for example, what are your thoughts on cultivating that kind of romance in your life as opposed to reading about it? Like, should you strive for that kind of passionate romantic connection with someone?
Oh, this just how long do we have for a conversation about this?
I mean,
I have a lot of thoughts about that. So, um, when we think about a book or a TV show, well, TV shows are a little different because if they're, sustained over a long period of time, it has a different arc. But if you just take a 2 hour movie or you take a novel with a definitive beginning, middle, and end, it's just a portion of somebody's existence, right? It's the most significant part of that person's life experience, or it should be, right? To be the most exciting movie or TV show, you're taking one of the most significant times of their life and compacting it into that particular product, whether it be a movie or a novel. So our lives do have those points, but most of our life isn't that. Otherwise, we'd be exhausted all the time. We can't have that level of we can't sustain that level of emotion or drama throughout our entire lives. Most of our lives are mundane and are supposed to be because that makes the other points that are significant points that much more significant.
Hmm.
I don't think it's sustainable. And particularly this is just my opinion, particularly in a romantic relationship, for example, if you have a spouse or a partner or whatever, long-term partner, a long-term romantic partnership or relationship, would you want to have that level of that level of drama that you have in a romance novel for 25 years?
And that's
It
a
would be
really
exhausting.
here's the thing though. Here's the thing that about storytelling, right? We expect a certain level of drama in our stories. We expect conflict. We expect at some point resolution and the happy ending. And there's a wonderful I love the Barbara Streisand movie The Mirror Has Two Faces in part because it is about a woman in her 40s or 50s who reinvents herself. And I love that movie. But she's an English professor at Columbia in the movie, and there's a wonderful scene where she's talking to her students about passion. And she says, we don't hear about the morning after in these tales because there is no morning after. The end of it is always going to be, and they lived happily ever after, right? We don't talk about what happens when he forgets to put the cap back on the toothpaste, or when she, I don't know, whatever, doesn't brush the cat like she's supposed to, whatever those things are. We tend to want these stories to be an idealized version of life rather than life. And yet, what are your thoughts on bringing some more of that story into our lives? Maybe not all of it, maybe not drama for 25 years, but cultivating that, because to me, romance novels especially, ultimately it's about falling in love. It's about love in one way or another. And I'm wondering, as a professor, as someone who works with a lot of people, what are your thoughts on the notion of love in the story being a substitute for the fact that someone might not feel like they have enough love in their lives?
So again, I have a lot of thoughts about this. Yes, I think that most stories, fictional stories, are romanticized versions of some aspect of our lives. I mean, you can say the same thing about when men watch, more of the action movie type of genre that is attract. I love action movies too, but more men tend to watch action movies,
Hmm.
and it's an idealized version of what a man's life might be. uh, so a similar type of thing. Um, yes, you're attracted to a more idealized version of life when you read those types of adventure stories or romance stories or whatever the thing is, that emotional experience that you want to have. Do I think it would be a good thing to try to bring some of that emotional experience into your own life if you could? Sure. I think it would be great. Um, I think we could have more love in our lives. Many of us strive to have more love in our lives. Yeah, definitely. Um, More adventure. Yeah, it would be great if we could have more adventure in our lives. Um, but we don't want to have uh, things that are going to be risky behavior.
Right.
We don't want the opposite extent where we're engaging in, risky behaviors that are going to be threatening to us in some way. So, yeah, to bring more passion and romance and excitement into our lives, it could be a very positive thing.
I would like to think so. That would be lovely for me. And we tell ourselves stories, I think, every day of who we are, of what we're going to do, of how we're going to behave. It's there's a running monologue in my head, and the people I've talked to over the years, we all have some sort of running monologue. And yet, if that's a story that we're telling ourselves, can we change it? And if so, what would happen? How could we change our lives by changing our stories?
I think for a lot of, and this is my impression based on my experiences as a professor dealing with hundreds and thousands of people over the course of my career, and my interactions with people in all the ways in which I interact with people, is that many of us, and I do this too, we get caught in this level of comfort and in a comfort zone
Mm,
and into routines that can become difficult and habits that can become difficult to break. Uh, and really finding opportunity and courage to step out of that comfort zone and to do things that you might not normally do, and to
mm,
have experiences that you might not normally have. Those are the ways in which you can bring that more passion and excitement and creativity into your life by going a different just going a different way to work where you're not on autopilot, when you're commuting,
mhm,
can be an adventure.
mhm.
There are places in Phoenix, I live in the Phoenix area. There are places that I find out about and I'm like, I've lived here, almost 2 decades. How could I not know that that was even here? How is that possible?
Right.
I mean, there's still exciting adventures that I can have even in the area where I live.
Absolutely. And it, if you look at everything as a voyage of discovery, you can have an exciting adventure walking around the block. So I really believe that. I think we can do that. But what about the notion of formalizing your storytelling? For example, you're an authorship coach. That's one of the things you do is you help people who want to write books, maybe novels, maybe nonfiction. How could someone do that? What role would you play as someone who would help a novice writer perhaps tell their story in that more formal way of writing a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction?
I think it's a matter of, if we can go back to just if you're just starting out and maybe aren't sure what to write, or you have a lot of ideas and you need to narrow the focus of asking, what am I most interested in?
Mm,
What are those things that pique my curiosity? Pardon me. What am I curious about? What are the things that excite me? What are the things that I can bring to other people? What do I have to offer? What are the things that I know about that I could share? What is my unique perspective and what is my unique point of view? What are things that I consider myself an expert in? What experiences have I had that I think, wow, other people can learn from this experience?
mm,
Or for a fiction writer, the power of what if, the power of what if. There are many ways in which you can use that, just that question, what if? If you want to write a science fiction, for example, what if this is something that I'd love to write. I don't have time right now, but I would love to write in the future. I want to know, what if if we do start going to the moon or to another planet, what if we're a person who's sent up there to run a hotel for tourists on the moon? How would that work? How would that play out? Could I be a person running a hotel on the moon and then have a murder happen? What if somebody got killed there? What happens then? I mean, that sets up an interesting story. You could have a murder mystery, an Agatha Christie type murder mystery at a hotel on the moon.
sure. And how would you investigate it differently because of the different
Yeah.
gravity and because of no atmosphere, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera? So many things would be different. Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're working in this new way, it's called Motivate the Muse. What what could somebody who wanted to work with you do to find you?
I am right now on Facebook. I have a group called Motivate the Muse, and I'm also on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram, Motivate the Muse, and you can contact me either of those places. I am also available online on Facebook, Karen Muller Bryson or Karen M Bryson. You can find me either place. You can also find me through my podcast, thecuriousprofessorpodcast.com.
Awesome. And I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions because I could
Sure.
keep you here for the next 7 hours easily. And we could talk about so much. And I hope you'll come back as you do more with Motivate the Muse, as you do more with being an authorship coach. I would love to have you back and delve a little bit more into the notion of storytelling. But this is not a short question, or maybe it is for you because you teach it. What makes a good story?
Yes, it's a very short answer. Don't be boring. The main thing you have to do is keep people reading.
That's great. I love it. I was taking a screenwriting class at with Gotham writers at Bryant Park in New York City where I live, and the man who was teaching the class said, here's what you need to do. The very beginning has to be so exciting that by the time they reach the bottom of page 1, they'd better want to turn to page 2.
Right. That's right. For me, that's the only rule, really, because there's so many different ways in which you can tell a story. There's so many different stories that can be told, and there's so many ways in which they can be told that I'm not really one for a lot of rules because, like I said, there is so dependent on the type of story you want to tell and who you are as a writer and who you are as a person. But you better not be boring because that's when people close the book or turn the TV off or whatever form you're working in.
That's great. I'm just gonna, that's gonna be one of the quotes that I put in an audiogram. Don't be boring.
That's awesome.
I love it. I love it. No, Karen, you don't understand. I mean, this is one of the things there I was an English major in college and I went to a Shishi Fufu University, the University of Michigan, and there were so many rules about what made for good writing that it got bogged down. And I remember clearly editing things to death to the point where nothing that it felt dry and lifeless as opposed to something that could be perhaps wrong in the eyes of the people who were going to do the criticism, but it was a lot more fun. So I'm so grateful that you said that. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to be on the show. I'm excited about Midlife on Fire, in part because I'm in it. So thank you for letting me into the anthology. But it's also out now because the episode is airing a few days after it's supposed to come out, a couple months after, actually. So, is there anything else that you want to be sure that the person who's listening right now knows about you? And if so, what is it?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
I know. And I have just one more question after this.
Okay. Something that people should know about me. I am the type of person who really finds a way to connect with other people. I am working with people all the time from all different backgrounds, as an educator, uh, you know, now hosting a podcast. I was previously a mental health counselor. So, I mean, I have worked with people from all different backgrounds, and I enjoy learning about people. I enjoy finding interesting things about people. Uh, I don't like it when people come to me and say, and this happens with students of mine, there's nothing interesting about me. There's nothing fascinating about me. There are very few times when I tell people, what to think or believe. But in that case, I always say, there is something interesting about you. There is
Mhm.
something fascinating about you. There is something unique about you. You just don't know what it is yet, or maybe haven't discovered it, but let's talk about you and tell me, what are some of the things you're doing? And I always am able to draw out absolutely fascinating things about people. I think there's just a confidence gap there,
Mhm.
or a lack of really appreciating what makes them unique or special or different.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like I say this to my clients, I say this out loud to everybody. If you don't tell your story, who will? Right? That to me is we all enrich the world by speaking our truth. So I'm so grateful that you said that. And thank you for sharing. You've been so gracious and wonderful and generous with your wisdom. I have just one more question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And it's a strange little question, but I find that it yields some pretty profound answers. And the question is this: if you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Oh man, I think and this just came to my head, and I'm not sure why, but I think I would say I love you,
Oh, that's
because
lovely.
I don't think people hear that enough.
Hmm.
I don't think people hear that they are loved. People are loved. They're loved.
That is beautiful. I so appreciate you saying that. It's funny, sometimes I have in my head what I think people will say. And for you, I thought she will definitely say, be curious. And you've out of left field, yeah, got me. You surprised me. So I'm so grateful that you did that.
It was such a pleasure being on your show today. I am so grateful that you invited me, and this talk has been tremendous. You are I want to tell your listeners what an inspiration you are to me
Oh my
and how
goodness.
much I appreciate you and all the things that you do. You are a phenomenal woman.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. My goodness. Karen, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. Wow. I feel all like I'm floating on air now. Someone who I really, really respect has just given me the highest of compliments. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This is the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I am Isolde Trachtenberg. I'm reminding you, first of all, you're going to want to find Dr. Karen M. Bryson and go look up The Curious Professor, seek out Motivate the Muse, learn to tell your story. She will help you. And she's, as you can tell, she's wonderful and fabulous. And get Midlife on Fire, because not just because I'm in it, but because there are a lot of women sharing their stories of being in this place and reconnecting and rediscovering with the inner fire of who we have been all along. I'm excited to be part of the anthology. It's already out, so you should just go get it right now. And I am grateful that you joined us for this incredible conversation on storytelling and passion and curiosity. This is again Isolde Trachtenberg. If you're liking the show, please rate and review it wherever you listen. I would love to hear from you. I would love to connect with you. Until next time, remember, dream big, be bold, and dare all. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.